Hi, I'm Samantha. Now watch as I melt before your very eyes and discuss the 8 books that I read in the month of June. I've got my little calendar here of all the books that I read last month, and I'm just going to be very brief about synopses and my thoughts and feels on each of these books, because I do plan to make smaller reviews that are a little bit more, I don't know, personalized for each book. I just think that the books are deserving for a little bit more time that I could spend and devote to them. So we're gonna work with that. But I do want to tell you what I read last month before I jump into these. So we're gonna start at the top of the month. First book I finished on the 1st of the month, by the way. 2 of these books were carryovers from May, and I was so close to finishing at least one of them. The other one, we'll get to that. First book was, what was it? Oh, We Are Never Meeting in Real Life by Samantha Irby. And this is it's a collection of essays by a much funnier Samantha than myself. And she discusses her life as a queer woman, as a queer black woman, and as a person who had to kind of take care of her mother growing up. She was ailing, and her father with his gambling addiction and abuse, and it was it's incredibly funny, but I know I just gave you a bunch of sad topics that she had to deal with, and she does a much better job of it than I do, like discussing these things. But she really talks about what it's like to be a black woman, and she does it in, I don't want to say a heartfelt way, in kind of like a Sedaris-y way. So if you like David Sedaris, I do suggest Samantha Irby. I am working on and reading We Are Never Meeting in Real Life, and I actually bought it today because, I mean, she's going to be an auto-buy author from here on out. So anyway, this was obviously a 5-star read for me. Next up, I finished the Lightbringer series. I read The Burning Light, and this is Brett Weeks's, it's a 5-book series. And this last book, unfortunately, was almost 1,000 pages long. And I listened to this entirely on audio, and unfortunately, it's 39 hours. It's exhausting. I listen usually at a 1 1/4 pace, because that's the best rate that I feel. You get a nice, you're not distorting the sound quality of vocals, or but it's also kind of eliminating a lot of those gaps. So you do lose a tiny bit of time, maybe 35-hour book. But that's beside the point. This is about light, color magic, and that's all I'm going to tell you. I'd like to discuss the premise of this book, and in non-spoilery way, and also the overall series, because it's a pretty solid series. Yeah, it's a nice conclusion. There are some things that I didn't like about it, meaning it kind of got a little preachy, and I think that there are some elements that could have been eliminated in editing, but did it need to be 900 pages? I don't think so, but maybe 800. The next book I finished for the month of June is How to Be Antiracist by Ibram X. Kendi. This was a follow-up book that he wrote after writing Stamped, and I believe it was Stamped. We wrote other books about anti-racism and how one should go about approaching to become anti-racist and to really combat racism. And this book actually, I wouldn't say it's an argument, it makes an argument for, it just says you can either be racist or anti-racist, which I know you're gonna have some All Lives Matter people disagree, but he highlights all of these issues in from economic policies to sexuality and how racism affects each one of those and how to really combat that. And I gave this book 4 stars. This was a book pick for the Marauders Book Club, which I will link down below. It's a Facebook group, so you can join that group and join our discussion. The next 2 books I'm going to discuss together because I read them with the Blackout Buddy Read, and that took place on Juneteenth. The discussion took place on Juneteenth over on Books with Shay's account, or I'll link you to that video down below. It's really good because they all discuss issues that have been plaguing them their whole lives, and they discuss these 2 books, mostly White Fragility. White Fragility discusses Black issues with white people and how we affect Black people negatively, to the point where our whiteness is used as a weapon against entire races. I learned a lot from it, but it's a difficult book for me to rate because it was a repetitive book, and it was really just to hammer home what you should know and what we need to understand, especially in these times for the Black Lives Movement. And it's a book that's essential for all white people, for all white people, especially those who are like, all lives matter people. They need to read this book. You need to read this book. I got a lot out of White Rage, and I gave this 5 stars. I learned so much history about Black history that you don't get in school system in the US, or probably in anywhere. It's incredible how much of our history has been whitewashed, and how Black citizens have been gaslit since the Civil War, since like forever, but since the Civil War. And it's an essential read, and it's one that I'm going to be picking up multiple times because I didn't have the book when I first started it. I had to listen to this on audio, and so much of it just infiltrated. But it's history, so and it's new history to me for events that, I mean, even ones that I grew up with, and it needs to be consumed repeatedly in order to really sit in there. So I highly recommend it above all of the books here on this list, especially if you're from the US. Next up, I read Pet, and I liked this book. I was gonna give this 4 stars until I got to the very end. This is about a young trans girl, and she is very sensitive to the point where she has a selective mutism, and the entire book, it comes up as like a middle grade read because she's so sensitive that people kind of are super gentle around her. Anyway, she is chilling out with this creature that comes out of her mother's painting, and they go on a monster hunt. I think it's supposed to be classified as a young adult book. I think it is classified as young adult with my library, and but it felt very much like a middle grade book until the very end, when things got violent and a bunch of F-bombs are dropped. So I don't know. I ended up giving this 3 stars in the end. So I also ended up giving about 3 stars to The Queen of Hearts. This book is about 2 women, Zadie and her friend Emma. It talks in 2 timelines, one when they're in med school and they're in training, and then when they're older and they have their own practices, and I think they're not in the same hospital. One becomes a surgeon and one's a cardiologist. And I liked that cardiologist lean for personal reasons. I thought that was going to be great. Now, the author is a doctor, and you can kind of tell that in reading it, it feels like she's getting that there were some notes that came through from her editor that was like, you need to elaborate on this, because things are somewhat overly explained, but it's also kind of cool because it's like, it makes it really obvious that a professional actually wrote this book. But that said, I found it super shallow, so I gave it 3 stars. I want to elaborate on this book in another video because it's really about just these 2 women and how their lives are connected from this other guy that they trained with in school, and he's coming back into their lives and he's kind of just a dick. And all I really got from this book is that you never want to date a surgeon. The last book I finished this month is a little outside my element, and that was Creatures by Chrissy Van Metter. Now this book follows a young woman in different points in her life. She lives off of the coast of LA on an island with her father and sometimes her estranged mother. The book opens just before the young woman's wedding and her mother shows up out of the blue. She wasn't even invited to the wedding, but somehow she knows. And she just shows up and she's not screwing with things, but she wants to know why she's there. So the book explores her life growing up with her dad, and her dad was a drug abuser, and he also grew a special kind of weed that was well known in the city. But it also talks about her life after her wedding and her marriage, I think 10 years out or so. The book's an exploration of relationships and loneliness, and it does it in a very lyrical and beautiful way. I gave this 4.5 stars. I'm flirting with the idea of giving it 5, but I did buy the book so that I could reread because it's very lovely. I mean, it opens with a dead beached whale, and it's rotting to all hell, but it's just so beautiful. It was beautiful imagery throughout. So I do recommend this book highly. So I'm going to be rereading this at some point here, and or at least I'd like to explore this book again at some point here. So until then, that's it. I lived to the end of this video. Thumbs up for Sweaty Sam. It's amazing. And I will be seeing you soon, hopefully with a tag and a bunch of book reviews. But until then, I will be seeing you around in, comment section, I guess.